Hello ballers and welcome to the big fat ranged mid expansion review. 6.2 is now open and things are getting involved. It's nice to take a look at where the classes are and where they're maybe going to be in the next expansion and towards the end of this one. So it's cool to see. Change things a little bit round from the first two, which you could check, which are the melee and the healers. And that is because of feedback from you guys. So I got rid of the smaller window and the notes on the side. You didn't think that helped very much. You wanted to see some more gameplay, that kind of stuff. So that's all there for you guys. Enjoy. This is basically, what is it? It's basically a look at things we asked for early in expansion, how they've developed, where they are now, and where they're likely to be in the future. All right, guys. So let's take a look at how the range classes are doing. So let's kick off with balance. The big boy. Blizzard's taking care of balance, from what I could tell, over the entire course of the expansion, really. And that's kind of okay to see, but you can't sort of hit the wrong targets in my mind. What we can certainly see already from Hellfire Citadel is there are plenty of fights where Starfall, that big nasty spell that seems to be so very clutch for the balanced druids, is extremely useful, as it was, of course, in Blackrock Foundry. And we also had so many re-rollers in Blackrock Foundry to the Moonkin. We saw it in pretty much every guild, where we saw that many guilds, many of the top-end superheroes were using balanced druids en masse for Blackhand, and people started to re-roll in preparation. And even after the nerfs, yes, you could do it without a balanced druid, no doubt about that. But it was still easier to have balanced druids because of this amazing spell. And this is entirely kind of my issue with the balanced druid, is it is so reliant on this one spell. Now you might say, hey, but DPS is fine. Yes, it is. Your DPS is absolutely fine, single target. And even with the new trinket stuff, which is looking pretty damn good, it's going to be all right. DPS is never the issue in these kind of videos. The numbers are what they are. I'm talking about the gameplay. And the gameplay is where it still suffers for me with the balanced druid. It still feels like the roller coaster you are riding, and you're basically just tagging along, ultimately. You're just making sure that you don't make mistakes because the game is still dictating things for you. It will decide when you change eclipse. It'll decide what spells you should be casting, and your skill comes from timing your star surges to try and maximize them as best you can. And on top of that, you can only go wrong. You can only go wrong. What would I like to see, I think, from the balanced druid is ultimately it take a leaf out of Feral's book. Now, it sounds weird after the comments I made about Feral, but Feral's talent system is based on how comfortable you are with what feral druids do. And you have choices at the top end which make things easier, medium, or hard. As much as it's not that hard at the top end, that is still the way the choices work out. You lose some DPS, but your rotation is simpler. What I would love to see is some sort of level 100 talent that allows you to take control of your eclipse again. Now, it might prove to be that if something like that in the game is it was mandatory for people to play. And if so, that wouldn't really work out. But maybe a slight DPS gain or something along those lines where you can take control of your character again and take it away from the computer. So you can actually make decisions and stuff. Maybe we can see things like mushrooms make a return if we can do them right and their numbers get tweaked. So all these extra flavorful and interesting spells that the balanced druid has access to, we could do something with rather than being limited to the few spells they have. One thing we can say, though, is being a balanced druid right now is no bad thing. You're well taken care of. There's no doubt about that. Your gameplay, for me, though, compared to the other casters, is one of the weakest. One of the weakest. This class went from one of my absolute favourites in Mists of Pandaria, and the great detail we could go into on how to maximize Eclipse and all that kind of stuff, and how you should be thinking about the fight and the timings and the spells you should be casting there was so interesting. It's had so much depth to it, so much character, so much flavour. And a lot of that has been taken away. And I was really hoping that over the course of expansion, maybe something would happen there. But no, it has not. And it's likely to stay the same with just simple balanced numbers being tweaked here and there to make sure DPS is not ridiculous, which it entirely could be with a couple of numbers shifted around. So balanced druid is a great choice, it has to be said. The Hunter. Not much to say on the Hunter. We expected an entire rework, honestly, and I was a big supporter that this is one of the classes that needs to be overhauled massively, because the only thing that's wrong with the Hunter is nothing specific, but God, does it lack flavour. It really does amongst the three specs in comparison to everything else in the game. My God, no one says that an arcane mage plays similarly, and I say similarly, not exactly the same, as its fire counterpart or its frost counterpart. We don't say that about the warlocks, we don't say that about the rogues. We just don't. They play very differently. The hunters do not. There is so much of the flavour derived from talents which go across the board that for me, each spec on its own is fine. I have no problem playing Marksman, I have no problem playing BM, and I have no problem playing Survival. But it has to be said, when I switch between the two, I barely play anything differently at all. Now, I understand, with the big push towards Marksman, BM still being workable in some areas, why people were a little bit pissed, because there was some opportunity with BM to min-max your playstyle, which a lot of players eventually want to do. In the casual mid-realms, you find that if you press your buttons on cooldown, that your DPS will be as it should be. But as you move up and you start DPSing not just 10 or 15 encounters, but when you start doing hundreds of encounters, and even certain bosses that may require 100 or even more than that on pulls, you start to think, I wish there was ways I could push myself just that little bit harder. And it has to be said, Marksman really doesn't have that going for it, other than the movement factor, which is generally tied to the raid group anyway, and can actually be more of a frustration than something you're trying to really fix, because at certain points you've got to gather. There's no way you're not moving from Alluring Flames on Archimon, for example. You've got to do it. And in that respect, it's out of your hands. Taken way out of your hands. Marksman, though, it has to be said, in this sphere, the push to Marksman isn't all that bad in terms of damage. As much as I don't like to look at numbers specifically, it has to be said, the ability to chain those crits on high percentage targets when there are a constant stream of high priority targets. Again, if we look at things like Archimond, what we can see there is a huge stream of adds that are always the priority over the boss, pretty much, right? They're always the priority, which gives Marksman great ability to be caning damage out of there on a constant basis, because you get continuously beneficial experiences from being able to do high damage on high health targets, which really helps your grade group out, making Marksman a wonderful thing. The loss of aspects of the Fox. Considering my main, let me just sum up that my main beef with Hunters was that each of the specs lacked flavour. That's going to be next expansion, so we're not going to see that. It's something I really hoped for, but it's clearly not going to happen. What I will say, though, the loss of aspects of the Fox should be seen as no surprise to anyone, and I've seen many Hunters crying out that, this is why I was brought to raids. Yeah, maybe that is the case. Why? Aspects of the Fox was easily one of the most powerful spells in the game next to Bloodlust. It was. If used correctly and you appreciate how much of a difference a good Aspects of the Fox made, it was crazy. What a weird addition to bring into the raid on Aspects of the Fox. And absolutely no surprise to most players that it was removed. Absolutely no surprise. They even talked about removing it at the very beginning of Warlords of Draenor. They did. They were talking about it. They're like, we probably need to remove this if you keep stacking Hunters. We're watching you guys. If you keep stacking Hunters for Aspects of the Fox, we're probably going to have to remove that spell. Because a big part of WoD was that you couldn't cast on the move, and you guys are kind of taking that element away. Maybe we shouldn't have even introduced this in the first place. If you were one of those Hunters who was relying on your Aspects of the Fox, you shouldn't be like that. Let's be honest, you shouldn't be like that. And yeah, it's kind of sad. In terms of Survival super weakness, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I see a lot of complaints that, I want to play Survival. Survival's not really there. Judging by how quickly the classes are changing right now, it makes you wonder what the PTR testing was all about, really. We knew all this information before Live came out, and no surprise, it's the same. So we're not going to take any shock from that. Survival might get buffed, but it'll just be a numbers buff. In terms of gameplay, you're going to be stuck with pretty much the same old stuff you've been stuck with for a while now, Hunters. And I get that not everybody is tired of that. Some people like the way the Hunter plays, and I can sort of understand that. If you're used to playing one spec, you can pretty much switch over to the other specs without causing too much of an issue. You're not going to have this relearning to do. Say a rogue switches from combat to sub, they're probably going to have a hard time if they're not au fait with that spec. Hunters don't really run into that, and that appeals to a lot of players. So while I get that, I would still like to see BM do something wonderful with pets. That would be awesome. I'd like to see Marksman do something amazing with being able to do long, drawn-out, sniperish shots. And I'd like to do Survival use its traps in more ways. People were very happy with Survival when traps were involved in some fashion, because that is the flavour of that spec. So hopefully one day we'll see that return, but it's probably going to be next expansion. The Mage, the big beast, the carry. It's surprising considering the amount of damage that they are consistently putting out that we don't see an absolute slew of mages, because they honestly don't contain anything that unique other than being a powerhouse of damage, and that is about it. Even losing their amp which I'm pretty sure most serious mages weren't actually that bothered about. Most of the mages were like, oh cool, I don't have to press that button now when I'm actually DPSing. They were actually more than happy with that. I've yet to see real complaints about mages losing amp because they know what they're there for and they're doing that fucking job. So in that respect, the only things I suggested and thought might be changed were things that we actually got early on. What we were concerned about is fire becoming very overpowered like it tends to do, then being nerfed and hammered into the ground. Now what we actually saw was the opposite. What we actually saw was Blizzard demonstrate, again, the fundamental flaw in providing huge bonuses via tier sets. And the duplicative nature of Ignite creating these crazy huge combustions. So people were saying, oh my god, Fire Mage is so overpowered. No, that set bonus was overpowered. And as it turns out, unfortunately, it was an absolute crutch. And there's now, and I didn't even see it coming. I don't think many people did. When we talked about the likely specs you'll be playing in 6.2, Frost just wasn't being mentioned. And then suddenly Frost is back, and a lot of people are playing Frost on progression and are likely to be playing that for a while until their arcane gear is absolutely maximized. What we can say has been great is that what we've seen is mages have been able to play every single one of their specs, and they're all interesting, unique, and flavorful. And not many other range can say that. Over the course of this expansion, they have been able to switch around and play everything. They haven't even had to have major changes done by Blizzard, although they've certainly had some. It's sad to see. I was hoping Fire would become amazing. Now, it kind of had that day in the sun in Blackrock Foundry, and I agree that that is what happened. But as gear increases, it's always nice to see that Fire becomes this sort of demonstrable monster that sometimes can provide moments of glory, and maybe in Farm we'll get to see that again, but right now the practical uses of both Arcane and Frost are just so good. So good. I would like to say there's some changes due for mages, but I don't think so. They have really settled into their own, and hell, in an expansion where fucking Arcane is pretty fun to play, no complaints from me, man. No complaints from me. Arcane is pretty fucking good now. They managed to do something with it. They gave it something to care about. Some fun to be had with it. And while it still has its sort of, you know, single targeting nature, it's not the end of the world. And being able to pick and choose between cleave is cool. Will Fire see some resurgence? Maybe. But you know a set bonus is bad when they had to actually, you know, change it in order to release that crutch from that spec. The Shadow Priest! And its ups and downs, the Shadow Priest, hasn't it? In the early days, I actually really disliked it. I definitely disliked COP. Void Entropy just seemed fucking garbage, and basically I was kind of yearning for my old Shadow Priest style of play. But in the guide, I actually pointed out that, you know, I kind of started to enjoy COP. As much as it was a very static play style, I kind of got it. It kind of made sense. It needed some player tweaks to make it really shine, and it had this sort of dot weaving mechanic thrown in by the players to try and give it some sort of lust. Damage-wise, Shadow Priest have their niche. They were punished early on in WoD development by saying, hey, you have really good AoE. Lol. Well, yeah. I assume they were talking about Mindseer at the time. I think, if I remember far back, we were considering Mindseer. And, of course, Mindseer is shit. But what we've seen as gear has progressed, the Shadow Priest has started to really glow and look pretty damn good, especially because of its auspicious spirits. My problem with that, and the gameplay of the Shadow Priest in general, is that is again something that's taken completely out of your hands, and you become less and less about playing a Shadow Priest in my eyes, and what makes the Shadow Priest reasonably the spec you chose, right? When you chose a Shadow Priest, you expected certain things. You expected to be in dots, which you still do, but your dots are pretty weak sauce in general. Vampiric Embrace is pretty crappy. Shadow of Pain is pretty crappy. And you keep them up, not for any other reason, really, than to, in fact, do some damage and to proc Auspicious Spirits, really. But their niche works. And Hellfire Citadel works with that niche, which is multi-target. You're not going to be number one on most fights that are just straight up single target, but the point is, similar with the Balance Druids, there aren't many fights like that. And therefore, in terms of raw numbers, the Shadow Priest is pretty damn fantastic, especially when it can start turreting Devouring Plagues into the boss. And that provides, in and of itself, on-demand burst, which people say lack because of a cooldown. Yes, they do lack that cooldown, but the way their class works means that they have this channeled and continuous burst. Now, the problem is that all depends on a number of factors. How many adds are involved? How many Shadow Word Pains am I rolling at the same time? What is my crit rating? How is my gear developing here? And overall, you have this sort of idea that eventually Auspicious Spirits becomes the best, and you play that, and the other specs kind of die away. Now, in that, there's no talent, flavour, or interest in my eyes. There's not, man. There's not much there. Your Void Entropy needs to be ditched, right? I mean, people have been pointing out the problems with this talent forever, and to have a level 100 talent that is just so diabolically fucking boring is painful, right? It's painful to say the least, to say, oh yeah, in many ways, it's like, I hope this thing doesn't become good because it's really fucking boring. And I really don't want to see that enter my playstyle, this extra dot that I just kind of keep rolling around. And with COP, the thing is with COP, I'm a little careful here because I saw the benefits of it. It was just a different playstyle, so I don't really want to knock it too hard. And there are some people who really like it. Personally, I don't feel like I'm playing a Shadow Priest when I'm playing that. I feel like I've had to alter my spec in a way to kill ads. Like, involving Mind Spike was because your dots, you know, didn't get to tick long enough. Now we have this weird scenario where you play this entire spec that involves Mind Spike without really having to move. That's not the purpose of the spec. That's not why you would take that talent. And you also... your dots don't last anywhere near long enough to be in the scenario where, you know, dots aren't worth casting unless it's stuff that's just going to melt and you wouldn't cast on it anyway, right? Every time I play a Shadow Priest with Auspicious Spirits, I'm just fucking clicking the boxes and pressing the dot because I really desperately want to see my dots extended in some way. And that would be my big hope for the Shadow Priest, is that in some way we can make dots last a little bit longer and feel more interesting. Vampiric Embrace has just become this dot that does stuff, which is kind of fine in itself, but you think about where that spell came from. This wonderful spell that recharged mana for your group, and you could use it in such a way, and you felt like you were getting something back, and you were filling this role, and it was awesome and very cool, and it was like, well, we're taking that away, so what's Barbaric Embrace for now? Well, it's just for damage. You know, it just does its damage, and it doesn't last very long, so you're going to be casting it a lot. It doesn't do a lot of damage, though, by the way, and in this respect, I feel like the entire spec is so reliant on Devouring Plague right now. And there's not a very big deal in being so heavily reliant on one particular spell, but it's not that fun. It's not that fun. It's like, I have this one spell and it can proc a lot and I can just turret out, and that's kind of cool. But everything else I'm doing is just to make sure this spell works right, and that's it. And no other spec really has that. You could argue that a Warlock has it with, like, Chaos Bolt, but it happens far less. Even with Charred Remains, it happens far less. And I want something interesting to happen with my Shadow Priest. I want something amazing to happen because it's such a cool idea. Such a cool idea. Whenever I read various sites about the Shadow Priest, they hear the same thing. It's like, yeah, you know, if we get in this situation, we get this happening, then we're pretty good. I never hear many people, like, excited. I want to feel excited about a class that steps into the shadows, sacrifices its healing potential in order to become this demonic thing. And I don't think any of the talents really reflect that. And I would love to see, going forward, the same thing I asked for earlier in the expansion, which is just something to happen with the talents that makes it exciting. Void Entropy is boring. COP is kind of okay, actually. You know, I'm alright with it. And Auspicious Spirits is just, you know, hope the game blesses you, or hope your gear out levels it enough so it will definitely bless you. But ultimately, you just become this turret for this one special snowflake button, and then keep the rest of the things ticking to create more special snowflakes, which for me, personally, I don't find great. And there was something really nice and niche about the Shadow Priest back in the day that made it sort of something you wanted to have in your raid, rather than just a faceless DPS that you can bring along. The Elemental Shaman. The chosen one in terms of what I was going to have as my raiding alt throughout all of Warlords of Draenor. Why? I fucking love my Elemental Shaman. I have such a blast on it. I really do. It's also known as the Dead Spec, the Dead Class, the Bench Warmer, the you wouldn't bring it in a million years to serious progress spec. The spec that you should not be playing anymore. It's known of all these things, and in fact, it has numbers to back that up at the moment. I do try and avoid the numbers thing, but if we look at certain fights, let's take Manoroth Heroic. What is dead last below the laughable Demonology Warlock, the Fire Mage, the Assassination? It's the Elemental Shaman coming at a flat 0. The only thing lower than that is the Survival Hunter, which nobody played. And that's really fucking sad to see, because I do have fun at it. Yeah, it's not overly complicated, but what it does is great. And it's great fun. Spamming Lava Burst is great fun. The talents work really well together. Getting some double Earthquakes going or having those double Lava Burst procs in order to be able to back-to-back the Lava Surges that you get without losing any procs and all that kind of stuff works well. It really does. So what's the fucking problem? Well, one is obviously the damage numbers. And two, the playstyle. The playstyle is fun, doesn't work really well in Warlords of Draenor, and certainly not in Hellfire Citadel. Why? Their playstyle requires setup. You've got to get your Flame Shock rolling, otherwise your damage is just shit. And frankly, having a cooldown and the fact there are many targets up, and often what we can see is that unless it's on some specific fights, is these ads are spread out. Elemental Shaman need to pad. But they're not padding really. I mean, these are ads that need to die, but they need them to be at least close enough for Chain Lightning to spread. They need to be staying in an Earthquake, and frankly, it's not always possible. There are huge amounts of fights in Hellfire Citadel that have ads, but they're kind of, they're either spread out, or we're spreading them on purpose, because if you put them next to each other, they heal up, or they're moving all the time, or they're doing something that just kind of fucking makes Elemental Shaman go, ugh. This is not how my class plays, but there's nothing we can do because everyone else can deal with this, and it's kind of how the fight works. I do feel for the guys, because you don't want to spend every global cooldown putting up a Flame Shock so your damage isn't shit, and then looking as the target dies in the next couple of seconds anyway, and your Flame Shock duration is just absolute shit. You had to put it up, but it lasted 3 or 4 seconds. All this kind of stuff just works against. It's kind of the anti-Moonkin, right? It's the anti-Moonkin, because everything they have works well. The Elemental Shaman just requires these few extra seconds, and a lot of the fights in Hellfire Citadel just do not give you the benefit. Where there are some great fights for Elemental, like Shadow Lord Iskar, Iskar's ads are up long enough for Elementals to do some rocking stuff, and that's when they really shine, but they need that. And that's the sad thing, they really, really need that. When we start to look at the single target fights, and I was flicking through some of the logs, yeah, they start to fall a little bit down on the bottom. If we look at Fel Lord Zakuun, it's there with like a combat rogue. You know what I mean? That's where it's lying in the Unholy DKs. These are the kind of specs in the Shadow Priest, which is completely out of their niche. And, once you're into that level on a fight that's just a straight up, single target fight, when you're when you're lower than a combat rogue, then, it's not the best day for you. It's really not the best day for you, and that kind of sucks. Playstyle wise, what would I hope for? What do I think should change? It's got to be the setup, right? We've got to be able to switch targets better than this. We can't have it where if ads have to be spread out, and the mechanics are designed that way. If you look at the Infernals on Archimon, they have to be spread out. That's a simple case of it. It's the way the fight works, but that shouldn't wreck the DPS. We shouldn't need a clusterfuck of ads in order for the DPS to work out. We shouldn't need that in any situation. It's similar to the Ferals, who are shit at AoE, give them single target and they'll absolutely shine. But you can't have that if only one fight out of 13 actually allows you to do that, actually allows you to shine. And that's really sad. If we look at things like Hellfire High Council, these ads are spread out pretty much. Elemental is way below a Fury Warrior, you know what I mean? And that's really sad. Or a Sub-Rogue going single target, which is just not where it's supposed to be, unfortunately. There's a niche for every single spec in the game, and I believe that's okay. We need that. We need to have niches for every single spec in the game. Unfortunately, Elemental's niche is on its own, and that's really sad. Every other spec has burst AoE or something along the lines, or great single target, great spread out DPS. There aren't many specs that need everything to be really gathered all the time and need that in order to perform. The only playstyle thing for me is just the reliance on Flame Shot, because it's really counterintuitive. If we fixed that in some way, or gave some spec that didn't need it in some fashion, I think most Elemental Shamans would be happy with that. If you could take a spec that's like, okay, you don't need Flame Shock on, it will do something, it'll increase your Lava Surge procs, so you can keep it on the main target, but you can easily switch target. Can we just have it on one target to make sure it's going to crit? Can we do something like that? Maybe that'll just nicely niche the problem, obviously with a couple of numbers buffs. I love this spec. I do. I have great fun every time I play my Elemental Shaman, and plus you bring so much fucking utility. You have all these options. Not that we're seeing much of that in Hellfire Citadel. It has to be said. Gotta be said, there's a lot of buttons on that Shaman. Not a lot of them getting a lot of love inside Hellfire Citadel, so that's something to bear in mind. And finally, the Warlock! Notorious at the moment, right? I mean, it's gotta be said, it is notorious after that awful comment is like, look, we just don't want you to play Demonology. And that is the flat out message from Blizzard, from the horse's mouth, is look, we just don't want you to play it anymore. What we saw, this is Blizzard's words, not mine, what we saw is that everybody started out playing all three, and then everybody started playing Demonology, and that's not fair because some people like the other specs. It's as simple as that, so we're going to kick the shit out of Demonology. And they did. And they did. Now, it's in a weird transition period. Now, they said Demonology was too hard. I kind of get that from the average player's point of view. Yeah, there are a few twists and turns that Demonology needs to do to play well. But I will say this, it is by far the most interesting and fun spec of the three. In my opinion, right? Totally subjective. In my opinion, once you've got the hang of Demonology, oh, you could have some fun times with that fucking thing. You only have to go back and look at the Demonology guide I did where we just started messing around with talents, and that was what it should all be about, right? Like messing around is, I'm going to do this and this here. Why? Because I can, and it's fucking fun, and Demonology is able to do that. And the other specs just are not. They're far more static since the removal of snapshotting. I actually called for several things to change for this, such as the removal of Haunt, ideally, and Nightfall be returning to Shadow Bolt in some way with instant cast Shadow Bolts and all that kind of stuff, which I find personally way more fun. The changes to Affliction, remember at a certain point I did main a Warlock and was mostly Affliction during TBC. It's come such a long way and downhill every step of the way for me. I was a Warlock in Method. I've played it over the last few specs and done really well with it over the course of time I have actually played it. So I know my stuff, but it's come very, very downhill, and snapshotting was what made it really interesting. The removal of that's made it boring. It's in a weird place at the moment. Okay, Demonology was gutted. It was absolutely gutted. But what we have now is a large player base of people who are like, well, I like Demonology, so I'm going to try and make it work. And in some scenarios, what they're pointing out is, hey, Demonology was better here, according to the logs, than something else. So you can look at a fight like Socrathar. It's like, well, Demonology did better than Affliction here. Yeah. And near enough every single fight, you can look at that and say, Demonology was in the middle of the three. If I look at Hellfire Council, I can see Affliction, Demonology in the middle, Destruction way at the bottom. And then say, well, you can see Demonology was better than Destruction here, and you guys are all saying you should play Destruction or Affliction. Yes! Because the problem with this mentality that's currently going on, and if you're one of these guys who got used to Demonology and enjoyed it, is that it is in the middle. And that's because Destruction and Affliction serve very different niches. What you'll actually have is, let's say the same fight where I said Affliction was at the top, Demonology in the middle, and Destruction at the bottom. You might read from that, well, I should take Affliction and Demonology, right? No. Why? Because Affliction is way ahead. Like miles ahead. Not even close, because that fight fits Affliction's niche. When it changes to a fight that that doesn't have that niche, it generally fits Destruction's niche. Demonology doesn't really have a niche that it fills anymore. That's the sad truth. In all scenarios, pretty much from what we're seeing from the numbers right now, is if you're playing Demonology, one of your other two specs would have been better. It's as simple as that. And I want people to kind of get the idea is while it might not be the worst on a certain fight, what's above it is likely to be way above it. Because it fits that niche. Destruction has a wonderful burst cleavy niche. Affliction is great for multi-targeting when things are going to last for a long time, which is why on either of the fights, on any of the fights you can see there, you're likely to want to be either Affliction or Destruction, not Demonology. So it has bit the dust, unfortunately. It has bit the dust. And the whole thing about add-ons being required, people ask me about this. You know, they said you need add-ons for it, but I use add-ons. Yeah, every spec in the game. If you're a DPSer worth a piss, you're using add-ons to DPS with. But what Blizzard's saying is people shouldn't have to get add-ons to play with it. I would say you do. If you want to play your spec well, you need add-ons in order to make that happen. Some will disagree with me on that, but time has told the story on that as far as I'm concerned. You can do better if you have accurate tracking in your face of what your spec is actually doing. What your class is putting out, where and when, you can do better with it. What they're saying is it shouldn't be fundamental, and I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. It shouldn't be fundamental to the spec, but I think there are other specs that are in a far worse case than Demonology. I just don't buy into the hype. I'm kind of a little bit sour because I like Demonology. Destruction has its moments where it can actually be maximized. I think that's great. Affliction, not so much. And there'll be very few people who will argue that Affliction has a lot of depth to it. It just doesn't anymore. And depending on your talent choices, a lot of the choices actually taken out of your hands. And that's sad to see. The future, they're looking to do a huge overhaul on Demonology. They've already announced they're going to do that. I think, if anything, the lines they're probably going to go with are to make Demon Form a cooldown again. which is when I used to play Demonology as a main spec, Demon Form was actually a big cooldown. And that was quite cool. It was alright. You built up to it, you timed it well, you had the ability to reset it faster, and doing that and doing it well paid off in spades. And it was nice to see the Warlocks going demo and know they were going ham and going fierce. I think more than that, though, Demonology is the bottom of the list to be changed, honestly. Affliction has to be the top, right? Affliction needs something more happening for it. It just doesn't have it. Every time I play Affliction, I'm just so fucking bored. And I've yet to really meet a Warlock that isn't in the same boat. It's like, yeah, it's kind of fun every now and again, but every time I play it for more than a few hours, I'm bored to shit at this spec. Especially when the dots start working with the trinkets and stuff, and you're like, oh, I'm just refreshing dots all the time, and this is really fucking boring. I want to go back to the stage of Affliction where my dots were on. Cool, I'm managing that. That's alright, but they're going to last long enough for me to do something interesting in the middle rather than just dotting and refreshing. I think dots overall could use with a little love. It's strange to see something like Balance, which has a generally really long time on its dots, and then the Shadow Priest and the Affliction Warlock, the classical dot specs, are just constantly refreshing all the time. And it's not that hard to manage anymore with Pandemic. It's not a thing that should really be a big deal. So that's something I would like to see in the future as well.